When you first learn about operational technology, OT, security, it is easy to assume that every important incident must involve someone directly changing a controller or manipulating a physical process. That does happen, but many of the most disruptive events that affect OT do so indirectly, meaning the initial damage is in IT systems, shared services, or trusted suppliers, and the OT environment gets pulled into the blast radius. Indirect impact is especially important for beginners because it explains why an OT site can suffer a shutdown even if no one ever touched a programmable controller. It also explains why the line between IT and OT matters so much, because organizations often share identity systems, remote access, patching processes, vendor tools, and operational decision-making across both worlds. The incidents in this lesson are famous for different reasons, but they share a key theme. Complexity and interdependence create fragile points, and attackers or failures can exploit those points. By learning from these events, you build the habit of thinking beyond the plant floor network diagram and looking at the broader ecosystem that keeps operations running. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Colonial Pipeline is a strong example to begin with because it shows how a cyber incident focused on business systems can still stop physical operations, even when the attacker is not directly manipulating pumps or valves. The core lesson is that organizations often choose to halt operations as a risk management decision when they lose confidence in their ability to monitor, bill, schedule, or coordinate safely. That loss of confidence can come from ransomware, where systems are encrypted or access is disrupted, but the deeper point is that business functions and operational functions are coupled. If dispatching systems, scheduling systems, or measurement and accounting systems are unavailable, the organization may not be able to ensure safe and compliant operation. For beginners, this is an important mindset shift. Availability is not only about machines running, but about the organization's ability to make trustworthy decisions about running. Colonial Pipeline also illustrates that emergency responses often involve human uncertainty, and uncertainty can push leaders towards shutdowns because the downside of continuing blindly can be severe. Indirect impact is often the story of trust being broken, not just technology being broken. Another lesson from Colonial Pipeline is that security posture is not only a technical design problem, but also an organizational readiness problem. When an incident happens, you need clear authority, clear criteria for shutting down or continuing, and clear ways to verify what is affected. If the organization does not have a practiced method for assessing whether OT visibility and safety are intact, it may default to stopping operations even if the OT network is technically untouched. That is not automatically wrong. It can be the safest choice. But it becomes a major risk and cost if the organization cannot restore confidence quickly. For a new learner, this highlights why documentation, asset understanding, and segmented design matter. They let you say, with evidence, which systems are compromised and which are not. It also highlights why backups and recovery plans for IT systems can be an OT resilience requirement, because the indirect pathway is real. The incident is often discussed as a ransomware story, but the broader learning is that governance and operational decision-making are part of the security outcome. SolarWinds is a different kind of indirect impact event because it centers on supply chain compromise, where a trusted vendor's software distribution process becomes a delivery mechanism for attackers. For beginners, this is a crucial concept because it challenges a simple idea of defense that says, we will block the bad guys at the firewall. If the attacker arrives through a software update that looks legitimate, traditional perimeter thinking is not enough. The event teaches the concept of transitive trust. You trust your vendor, you trust their code signing and update process, and you trust the software running with high privileges in your environment. If that chain is compromised, attackers can gain broad access without using loud, obvious exploit techniques. Even though SolarWinds is an IT-focused example, it matters to OT because many organizations use shared monitoring and management tools across the enterprise, and because OT often relies on vendor software and remote support utilities. The takeaway is not that vendors are bad. It is that vendor trust must be managed, verified, and limited where possible. Indirect impact often begins with a trusted relationship that was not designed with a hostile assumption. SolarWinds also highlights why detection and response cannot rely solely on blocking known bad indicators, because supply chain incidents may look like normal activity for a long time. When a management tool communicates with its servers, that may be expected behavior, and even administrative actions may appear legitimate. The lesson for new learners is to focus on behavioral anomalies and on controlling the blast radius of trusted tools. If a single monitoring platform has wide administrative reach, it becomes a powerful platform for attackers if compromised. This suggests practical defensive thinking, least privilege, segmentation of management networks, careful review of which systems a tool can reach, and strong logging around administrative actions. It also reinforces the importance of understanding what normal looks like for privileged software, because the most dangerous activity may be hidden inside expected flows. In an OT-adjacent context, think about tools that manage remote access, collect logs, or update endpoint software, because those are the types of systems that can become indirect pathways. The real-world story is complex, but the learning is simple. Trust should be earned continuously, not granted forever. Maersk is often discussed as a powerful illustration of how a large organization can be disrupted at a global scale by malware that spreads broadly and breaks core business operations. While it is not an OT-only story, it is a resilience lesson for any organization that depends on technology to coordinate physical movement and operations. The malware event associated with Maersk is remembered for causing widespread system outages, including the inability to process shipping, manage logistics, and coordinate the flow of goods. For beginners, it shows that physical operations can grind to a halt when the digital nervous system fails. Even if the cranes and trucks still exist, the organization may not know what to load, where to send it, or how to confirm what has been received. This is indirect impact in its purest form. The physical world is constrained by the loss of information systems that coordinate it. The lesson is that cybersecurity incidents can become operational crises, not just IT tickets, because modern operations rely on digital systems for nearly every decision and transaction. From Maersk, a major takeaway is the importance of preparedness for large-scale recovery, including the ability to rebuild identity services, endpoint fleets, and core applications under pressure. For OT learners, this matters because many industrial organizations are part of supply chains, and a disruption in logistics can create production stoppages, safety risks due to storage limits, or rushed operational changes to meet delivery constraints. It also matters because many OT sites depend on central services like directory authentication, certificate infrastructure, and shared network services. If those services collapse, even systems that are physically intact can become unusable or unsafe because operators cannot authenticate, monitoring dashboards cannot load, or support teams cannot access the tools they need. The deeper lesson is to identify which enterprise services are critical dependencies for OT operation and to plan how to operate when those services are degraded. That might mean having alternative authentication paths, local operational procedures, or pre-staged recovery steps that do not require improvisation. Indirect impact often turns into direct operational pain because dependencies were invisible until they failed. AcidRain is often discussed in the context of destructive activity affecting network devices and communications infrastructure, which can create indirect impact by cutting off monitoring and coordination. For beginners, the important concept is that communications and network infrastructure are not just plumbing. They are part of the operational safety envelope. If you cannot see your process, you cannot control it confidently. If you cannot communicate between sites or with a control center, you may have to shift to manual operation or stop operations altogether. Destructive events that target routers, modems, or other network devices can therefore cause operational disruption without touching the control logic itself. This is a reminder that availability and integrity depend on the supporting layers, and attackers can aim at those layers to create chaos. It also highlights that cyber impact can be as simple as breaking the paths that operators use to observe and coordinate. When visibility collapses, decision-making becomes riskier, and organizations may choose shutdown as the safest option. The lesson from destructive and disruptive events like AcidRain is to treat network infrastructure as an operational asset with its own resilience plan. That means understanding which links are critical, where redundancy exists, and how quickly communications can be restored if devices fail. It also means considering how incident response works when connectivity is degraded, because many modern response techniques assume remote access and centralized logging. In an OT setting, you may need the ability to operate locally with local procedures and local authority if central connectivity is lost. Another important beginner lesson is that attackers sometimes choose destructive actions not because they are sophisticated, but because destruction creates uncertainty and slows response. If defenders are busy rebuilding basic connectivity, they may miss the attacker's broader goals or lose time verifying what else was touched. Planning for infrastructure failure is therefore part of cybersecurity resilience, not a separate networking concern. The indirect impact is that operations become less safe and less controllable when communications are unreliable. CrowdStrike 2024 is an especially valuable case for beginners because it illustrates that not all impactful events are caused by adversaries. Sometimes a software update, an error in a security product, or a misconfiguration can trigger widespread outages. The key learning is that the modern enterprise, including OT-adjacent environments, depends on software supply chains and rapid updates, and that creates a different kind of risk, systemic fragility. When a widely deployed component fails, the result can look like a cyber attack because the impact is sudden and broad, but the root cause may be operational rather than malicious. For OT learners, the point is not to blame security tools. It is to recognize that change management and update governance are part of security and resilience. If an endpoint protection update can take down a fleet of systems that can affect engineering workstations, remote access jump hosts, or monitoring servers that OT depends on. Indirect impact occurs because shared platforms fail, and OT feels the consequences through loss of access, loss of visibility, or loss of coordination. This kind of event teaches the value of controlled rollout, testing, and staged deployment, especially for systems that support operations. Many organizations feel pressure to update quickly for security reasons, but speed without safety can create downtime that is just as damaging. Beginners should understand the concept of blast radius in updates. The more simultaneously you change, the more simultaneously you can fail. Good resilience practice involves having rings of deployment, rollback capability, and a clear understanding of which systems must be especially stable. In OT contexts, that might include systems that mediate access between IT and OT, systems that provide time synchronization, and systems that run monitoring dashboards. The lesson also reinforces why incident response should include the possibility of internal failure modes, not just external attackers. If you assume every outage is a breach, you may take actions that make recovery harder, such as wiping systems unnecessarily or disconnecting networks that are needed to restore functionality. Clear, evidence-driven diagnosis is essential, and that is a skill beginners can start practicing conceptually. RTX can be discussed as part of the broader theme of supply chain and third-party risk, where incidents at large organizations can ripple through partners, vendors, and customers. The specific details of any single corporate incident are less important here than the pattern. Complex organizations rely on many interconnected systems, and those connections create pathways for indirect disruption. When a major organization experiences a cyber incident, the impact can include delays in manufacturing, disruptions in maintenance and support, or constraints on the ability to deliver parts and services. For OT, that can translate into deferred maintenance, delayed patching, or prolonged operation of aging equipment because replacements are not available. Indirect impact can also occur through trust relationships, such as shared portals, shared data exchange, or integrated vendor support processes. Beginners often think of third-party risk as a contract problem, but it is also an operational continuity problem. If you cannot get a vendor to support a critical system during an outage, your recovery timeline changes dramatically. The broader lesson from third-party-driven impact is to map dependencies and ask uncomfortable but necessary questions about what happens when a dependency fails. Do you have alternative suppliers for critical components? Do you have offline copies of essential documentation? Do you have a way to operate safely if a vendor remote access path is unavailable for a week? Do you know which systems depend on external identity services or external update services? These are not glamorous questions, but indirect impact incidents show that they matter. They also show that security is not only about stopping attackers, but about making sure the organization can keep operating safely when the world becomes messy. A beginner can understand this by thinking of operations like a chain of linked steps. If any step depends on a system that fails, the whole chain can stop. Indirect impact happens when the break is not inside OT itself, but somewhere in the ecosystem that OT needs. When you connect these cases, a simple picture emerges. Indirect impact is about dependencies, and dependencies are everywhere. Colonial Pipeline shows how business system disruption can force operational shutdown because trust and coordination are lost. SolarWinds shows how a trusted supplier can become a hidden entry point, turning normal updates into a risk. Maersk shows how widespread IT failure can stall global physical operations because logistics depends on digital coordination. AcidRain illustrates how destroying communications infrastructure can cut off visibility and control, forcing safety-driven pauses. CrowdStrike 2024 demonstrates that non-malicious failures in widely deployed software can still cause major outages, reminding us that security includes safe change management. RTX represents the broader ripple effect of major incidents through supply chains and service dependencies. The practical lesson for new learners is to broaden your threat model, not just hackers, but also vendors, updates, shared services, and operational decisions under uncertainty. As you build your OT security intuition, it helps to remember that indirect impact is not a side story. It is often the most likely way an OT environment will suffer disruption. Many organizations work hard to isolate and protect controllers, but they still rely on enterprise identity, remote access, patching infrastructure, and vendor support, and those dependencies create pathways for interruption. The goal is not to eliminate every dependency, because that is unrealistic, but to understand which dependencies are critical and how to reduce their blast radius. That means segmentation and least privilege, but it also means governance, staged updates, clear shutdown criteria, reliable backups, and practiced recovery procedures. It means treating monitoring and access systems as operational assets, not just IT conveniences. Most of all, it means cultivating calm decision-making based on evidence, because indirect impact incidents often create confusion that leads to costly overreactions. If you learn the patterns from these events, you begin to see OT security as a discipline of resilience and trust management, where protecting operations includes protecting the systems and relationships that make operations possible.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.